from the Pyle Media Venture Studios in Noblesville, Indiana. This is the Jacob Pyle Show with tonight's guest, author Frances Altman, and the host of our show, Jacob Pyle.
Thank you, Zach, and hello, everybody. Welcome to the Jacob Pyle Show. My name is Jacob Pyle. Glad to have you here with us. For the next 30 minutes, unscripted conversations, but with a difference. No shouting, no cussing. All topics that are being discussed on the Jacob Pyle Show have been approved by me before the show taping. First of all, happy St. Patrick's Day. As you can see, I'm wearing my green, and my guest for tonight is wearing hers too. We have a clip that I want to play for you concerning the book that my guest for tonight is here to promote. The book is entitled Destiny's Daughter. It is written by Frances Altman and can be found at most bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apprentice House Press. This clip gives kind of a short summary of the book to all of you, so let's play the clip.
Destiny's Daughter highlights the events in the life of Dr. Mary Edwards Walker, the only woman Medal of Honor recipient, whose philosophy and actions parallel many goals of young women today. Mary pursued a dream to become one of America's first female physicians, in an 1860s society that opposed such a career. She was swept up in unfolding events that never could have been predicted, serving under fire in the Civil War, imprisoned at Castle Thunder, protesting as a maverick suffragist, reforming women's dress style, and receiving the Medal of Honor. She was a strong, opinioned woman who charmed court and commoners in England, lectured and lobbied for women's rights, from Midwest to the White House. She conveyed her views on temperance, smoking, and women's abuse, and she traveled with the popular dime museums. She urged women to become independent and to support themselves in a chosen occupation. She tuned protesting into a marketing tool for women's rights. She recognized her self-worth, learned to listen and held her tongue when necessary, but often rebutted such stalwart suffragists as Susan B. Anthony. Destiny's Daughter is a contemporary chronology, emphasizing personality and achievements. This book coincides with Civil War and women's rights interests. Learn more about Mary Walker in Destiny's Daughter. Available at most fine bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apprentice House Press.
All right. Joining us now via Zoom to give us more detail about the book is the author of the book, Frances Altman. Frances, thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here with you, Jacob, and certainly to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And of course, March is National Women's History Month. So that's probably...
So it all works out, yeah.
Yes, works out.
Right.
Real coincidence. And since the trailer there, as we call it, really defines much of my subject, Mary Edwards Walker, we won't have to really discuss a great deal about the other parts of the book. It of course traces her, not her everything she ever did, but I tried to place myself in her skin and pick out the most exciting things that she did, and felt that was what other readers would enjoy. And also, I tried something a little different, and that's to surround my character with what was also happening at the same time that she was treading up and down the streets of Washington, D.C. What was happening out on the West Coast? Indians and settlements and pioneers and all of the other things that were going on. So anyway, that's the sort of the whole book in a nutshell. She was a close friend of Abraham Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln. She was there advocating not only for women's rights, but for other types of crusades that were going on, the local sewer system and anything that she could become involved in. So I really felt that her perseverance was something that sort of guided me through COVID while I was trying to put the book together. So anyway, that's the sort of wraps the book up, so to speak. I don't want to spend a lot of time rattling about the book. You can also, of course, don't have to buy the book. Ask your library if they have it. I'm a firm believer in going to the library, particularly for senior citizens who like to save a few coins. Also, something that's happening that sort of coincides with Mary Walker is that her face or her portrait will be minted on a new quarter that's coming out that will be issued in June. And as you may have already heard, Fort Hill in Richmond has been renamed in her honor and is now called Fort Mary Washington. So she's sort of come back out of the shadows. And I'm happy to see that, because sometimes when we think of people, ladies particularly, back in the 1800s, we're always just jumping to maybe pick out someone like Susan Anthony. And we forget that there were a whole group of women that each one was sort of doing her thing.
Wow. Now, before we, I do have one question on the book that I want to talk to you about. But first, you were telling me before we taped our show today that you actually have a connection with Indianapolis, Indiana. Tell us about that.
Yes, during the I would say the early '60s, my husband and I, he was with the AC Nielsen Company in Chicago, and he was an auditor, and we moved to Indianapolis and lived there about 4 years. My daughter, Karen, was born there in St. Francis Hospital. And of course, I think you're only about 25 miles from Indianapolis. So I did get out and certainly know where Noblesville lives. And really appreciated living there. It was a great community. And that's where I was doing a lot of my writing from home, and started writing short biographies, 175 pages, for Denison Company. And I had written four men's biographies. And so that's where I sort of started writing and investigating and doing historical research on Mary Walker. So we have some closer ties than I generally do with the things that I write.
For those of you who don't know, Noblesville, Indiana is where I tape my show. Not only is it where I tape my show, I actually live in Noblesville myself. So yeah, I always enjoy having guests on that have a connection with Indiana. That's really cool.
Well, hey, did you happen to know that right there, Noblesville did send about 67 volunteers into the Civil War under their troop name, which was Company 1 of the 6th Indiana Volunteer Regiment. And somewhere there in one of your cemeteries, close to something called Monument Road, is some type of a crumbling concrete monument that signifies your participation.
Wow.
So, but you didn't. That's one of the things that's so great about being a historical researcher. You get all these little bits and pieces, and you sort of map them together. Then, and pretty soon you either have I love doing that to a story, and that sort of becomes your basis, and you could use your imagination from there on.
All right, we have to pause for this first break. When we come back, we will have part 2 of my conversation with Frances Altman. We're going to get more into who Mary Frances Walker is and all that right after this important message. Stay with us. Welcome back. My guest for tonight is Frances Altman, author of the book Destiny's Daughter, which can be found in most bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apprentice House Press. Now, you pretty much at the beginning of the show kind of gave a summary of the book. But for those, I think you kind of answered this too when you gave the summary. For the viewers who are not familiar, which hopefully most of you have probably, when you took your history classes in school, they probably should have mentioned something about Mary Edwards Walker. Tell us about who Mary Edwards Walker is.
Well, of course, she was as a youngster. She was born and grew up on a farm, Bunker Hill Farm, in Oswego, New York, and she began as a child treating people and sitting up with them at night. And her father was sort of a amateur doctor. He prescribed herbs and things like that to people. And she became interested in medicine and dreamed of becoming a doctor. And of course, at that time, women were that was a no-no for women. She finally found a school that would permit her. I think she went 32 weeks or something like that and received a medical degree. And then she couldn't find any place to practice. And so she went off to the Civil War, which had it had begun. And they said, no, we're not going to employ anyone. You can volunteer. And so for many years at her own expense, she worked at the Indiana Hospital and right there in Washington, D.C., and began a career as a volunteer doctor and was welcomed by the doctors that were in the field, but kept working her way up and was accepted by some and totally rejected by others. So most of her activity was in the Fredericksburg area, Warrington, Virginia, where she was able to go. She was a very good conversationalist, and she was pretty sure of her skills. And she went to General Burnside and convinced him that she should be sort of a mop-up person. She would go into the battlefields after the battle had been fought, and there were still many wounded there. And she would load them on different kinds of trailers and different wagons and so forth, and bring them out and put them on the trains and send them to this Indiana hospital there in Washington, D.C. And so she continued that way until eventually someone sort of gave in and said, okay, you can become you can join the army now and become an official medical doctor, which she did for several years. After that, she, of course, then went on to become a suffragist. And as I mentioned, she was she was more than just wanting women to have the right to vote. She wanted women to be able to plan a career, to pick your own husband, to wear sturdy shoes if you want to go out and march. So yes, in some respects, she might have been somewhat of a character, but she was also very sure of what she wanted to do, and she felt that other women should be encouraged to think this way and not be under the thumb, so to speak, of a parent or even a husband.
Mm-hmm.
Does that give you a little clearer picture?
Yeah, it does. It does give me and the viewers at home a clearer picture, so that's really cool.
So when you see ladies marching today, you might think about her, because so many of them are sort of doing the same thing that she suggested that they do. Wear comfortable clothing. That was another one of her crusades, was to get into wearing pants under your dress. That's what she did. But that came as more or less something that you would do when you were going out in the garden. Wear some trousers so that the dew or dirt would not be getting onto your legs as they would when you were wearing these long skirts. She was often criticized for that, but there were many women that did wear trousers under their skirts. So she was not really as weird as some biographies make her out to be. I do want to say also that she was had a great deal of camaraderie with soldiers, with generals, with congressmen. And that was surprising, even, and you're reminding me that this is St. Patrick's Day. She was with around some very strong men and soldiers and so forth, yet she was supported in most cases by the temperance unions. Whenever she spoke, many of the temperance unions would support her. So she was welcome in both sides of the temperance problem.
All right, so
some conversationalist, apparently.
Yeah.
What I've gleaned from going back to her, she had written one book. She was not a writer, except she did. This was interesting. She wrote all of her speeches out on 8 by 11, 8 by 10 size paper, and then would stand there and read it. And so she didn't really write many articles or whatever, but did for a short period of time wrote a book called Hits. And from that is where I gleaned her real personality, because sometimes when you read historical books, they're written in the third person, and you really never get into the personality of it. And so I felt that I was getting a little closer to the real woman when I read her book and how she had expressed her different philosophy.
Awesome. All right. So, what do you think? You mentioned in now you recently published an article too called "Learn to Listen," which was recently published in Higher Learning for Teachers. I happen to agree. I grew up as well as you with no internet, no computer, no social media, none of that, and just sitting down and having an old-fashioned conversation. That is, in part, is why I created the show. This is not an interview show. I want this to be like a half-hour in-depth conversation about you and your books and your articles. What kind of gave you the idea to write this article?
Well, part of my career, I've not only been working for newspapers and so forth along my 50-some-year career, I also taught in the business school at Virginia Commonwealth University. And that was one of the places where I began studying listening. Listening is the other partner along with conversation. You really can't have a good conversation unless someone is listening. That was the information that I wrote about and Learn to Listen, because you have to teach yourself more or less to learn to shut up, to stop babbling on like I am right now, and listen to what the other person is going to say back to you. And in fact, if you're planning on having a great conversation with someone, you should really think ahead of how they could respond to you. So listening plays a very strong part in talking, because we have come upon a period, possibly permanent period, where we're sort of shortcutting all of our speak. When we speak through email, that's a very short sentence anymore. Sometimes we're doing a Twitter, it's like blah blah. We're not really going into anything lengthy. So that primarily is my secret, I guess, to why or how you can create an interesting conversation. And of course, I need to congratulate you because you're listening.
Well, thank you. That's like I say, that's the goal. That's, because that's why I created the show. Like I said, just to have because my goal in life is just to have an in-depth conversation with all of you with fewer interruptions, and unfortunately we have to interrupt this conversation for another break. When we come back, I will have a look at who our guest will be for next week, and we will conclude our conversation with Frances Altman. We'll be right back. Welcome back. My guest for tonight is Frances Altman, author of the book Destiny's Daughter, which can be found in most bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apprentice House Press. I hope you can join us next week on the Jacob Pyle Show, where my guest will be meteorologist Christina Ernie. So, going back to the topic of conversations, which we started right as the segment was ending here, what do you think of our conversation so far?
I think probably that I've been talking too much, and that possibly you might have had a couple of other questions that you would like to inject, and then I would be responding to another topic.
I will say this, we had guests on in the past, we had a guy on about we had two guys about almost a month ago that was on, and we had, and they used that, I barely had time to ask any questions, and they did all the talking, which is a good thing because you're here to promote something, you're here to promote a book, and I wanted to give, even though I always say this, even though this is the Jacob Pyle show, the real I'm just the host of the show. I'm just the moderator. I listen to the conversations and I'm asking the questions, but really the stars of the show are you, the guests on the show, because you're talking about your book or whatever it is you're promoting. Some people use it as a platform to talk about whatever the topic is that week, and it. I wanted this to be spontaneous because I do have a list of notes here of questions I can ask, but those are mainly if if you run out of things to say or things like that, I can always look at the notes and say, hey, here's something we could talk about right here. But so far, on your end, you've been doing a good job.
Oh, so well, thank you.
You're welcome.
The some of the things that go into go into writing are the first thing that someone always asks you is how long did it take you to write it? With this book, I kept finding bits and pieces of my story at different parts along through the years. Since I could not in the beginning write it, I just sort of put it in the drawer, went on doing other things. And that's one of the interesting things about it. When I went on a business trip one time to New York, I came to near Drexel University, where they had stored cardboard boxes of things about Mary Walker in their basement. And they said, "Oh, go down there and dig through it." And we made memograph, or we made copies of it, of different pages. I brought them home. But now today, someone can do research, historical research, at most universities or museums, and it's all digital. So you don't have to fool with paper anymore. Another one of the things about Mary Walker is that in June, her home or native state there, Oswego, New York, will be holding a festival, June 3, I think, in her honor. And but much of her memorabilia is scattered around with different museums. The Smithsonian Institute has a purse and her Bible, I believe, and then another place has her cane. So I found that sort of interesting because you don't generally run into a story where your bits and pieces are scattered all over. You'll find, this is my fifth book as a biography, and so every one of them has been put together in a different way. One of them, I even spent a day with the gentleman, a banker, did his interview in one day and was able. He had provided so much material, I didn't have to even do research, just talking to someone. That again is one of the tricks I hope that I have put into the book, is that you begin to feel an empathy for her. She persevered through everything, and I found I was finishing the book up when I was doing during COVID, and she sort of gave me courage to continue on with this day after day during a dreary period.
Oh, that's cool.
All right. Now, the last part of our conversation tonight, I want to mostly talk about journaling. Why is journaling your experiences so important to you?
Well, for me, writing has been both a hobby and a career tool. I was with companies where I did marketing and so forth, and you're writing all the time. But journaling it appeals to even elementary school children and right through your senior citizens. And if you're sitting there writing about something, you're going into a sort of another world, and it's very relaxing. The Veterans Administration promotes it. So does the Department of Health and Aging, because so many people say, "Well, I'd like to write a little something about my great great uncle or something that I remember," and we're not talking about them being ambitious and wanting to write a book. They merely want to just write more or less a letter. And so all the experts contend, and who am I? But anyway, I find it very therapeutic, and many senior citizens also find it therapeutic. And as for younger children, it begins to help them uh, imagine and structure compositions, which I think as you begin writing, you get better as you continue reading and also writing. So for every age group, it's as I say, therapeutic, or I feel it is.
Yeah. Now, what would I mean? This should be obvious to most younger people, but what would be your advice to anybody that would like maybe start their own journal?
Well, most people just have pen in hand. Most people usually get some type of a notebook and do it by hand. I think that, but if you have a computer, old typewriter, whatever, however is best for you to write it down. Myself, they have what they call prompt books, and and that's where they're mostly books of questions, and you can sort of start writing the prompt, and then it leads into, as you're writing, you're thinking about whatever the real topic is. But for my advice to people, I just say take a piece of paper and start off by saying, "Dear John, dear Uncle so and so, I'd like to tell you today about my day in school." That primarily is what the younger elementary school children do. Start writing about, "This was my day in school." They may, as time goes on, continue to write about their surroundings, their family, and get more extensive. But most of the time, if you just begin very simply, don't try to make a job out of it. Just just something that you feel comfortable with. And usually, as time, if you do that a few times, it'll get easier. And one thing that older people can do is you can write a little story on a sheet of paper, tuck it into a card, and it makes a nice gift for giving some of your younger members of the family.
Yeah, journaling. I would say, unlike social media, journaling is like your own thoughts in private. And only
Well,
you can
correct.
see
Yeah.
them.
It's really the difference there between journaling and writing a memoir is, a very narrow um, thread, so to speak.
Okay. Well, as I always say, this conversation could go on forever if we wanted it to, but we do have to end our conversation here as we have ran out of time. Frances Altman, thank you for dropping by, and good luck with your book. Her book, by the way, is entitled Destiny's Daughter, which can be found at most bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apprentice House Press. Before we leave, the only thing I want to say is if you are celebrating St. Patrick's Day and you're out drinking tonight, call a cab, call an Uber, find a designated driver. Don't drink and drive, because I want to hopefully see you back here next week when I will have another guest to talk to. Till then, for Frances Altman, Zach Brown, and all of us on the Jacob Pyle Show, I'm Jacob Pyle. Thank you for watching, and good night, everybody.
Good night.
If you want to be a guest on The Jacob Pyle Show, or if you'd like a DVD copy of tonight's program, send Jacob an email. His email address is jtpyle1@aol.com. Or if you're ordering a DVD copy of tonight's program, send $10 check or money order to The Jacob Pyle Show, care of Pyle Media Ventures. Post Office Box 154, Noblesville, Indiana 46061. Please include the air date seen on your screen when ordering. Residents outside of Indiana add $5 shipping and handling. This is Zach Brown speaking for The Jacob Pyle Show, a Pyle Media Ventures presentation. This program has been pre-recorded.